Hello everyone! Today we're going to make this sweet lounger out of cedar 2x4s and fence pickets on Nathan Builds. As I mentioned in my last video, amazingly cedar has not gone up that much in price. I get the pickets for a little bit over $3 and the 2x4s for $10. They're a bit rough, so I like to plane them down a bit and then square them up on my table saw. For this project, we are using, I think, 5 2x4s and 5 pickets, so that's roughly $60 or $70. This design uses a 2x4 skeleton which holds the slats on the front, but is exposed on the back. It's pretty amazing how strong this is. I could have even removed some of the supports underneath the seat and it would still be fine. I started cutting down the 2x4s to get the pieces for the spines of the lounger. Each spine is made up of 3 boards, one for the back, one for the seat, and one for the leg rest. Now, if you don't have a table saw, you can still do the project with just a circular saw. It's just going to be a little bit harder and maybe not quite as precise. I really like using a crosscut sled to do my crosscuts. It just feels a little bit safer, is easier to sneak up on things, and is just a bit faster in my experience. With those pieces cut, I laid everything out on my work surface to plan out the angles. This is really the hardest part of the project. I'll leave a link to the SketchUp drawings in the description if you want to try and build this yourself. For the first angle where the back connects to the seat pieces, I set my speed square to 9 degrees, then traced the thickness of the 2x4. We're going to be using half lap joints for a couple of the different joints, and I'll also demonstrate how you could just use pocket holes, or just clamp and glue everything together. For this joint, I'm using my circular saw and a speed square to cut away a slot for the 2x4 to sit. Take your time with the edge cuts, then just remove the rest of the material with multiple passes. Finally, I clean things up with a chisel. For the seat half of the half lap, or I guess technically this is a cross lap, I used my table saw and a miter fence to make the cross cut, and then I used the table saw fence to make the second cut. If I did this again, I would actually make a jig that would hold the board and ride along the fence for this cut. It would be much safer and would also result in a much better cut. With that joint done, I could measure out the location of where the leg is going to attach to the seat. Then I positioned everything out using one of the lines on my workbench as the ground line. This let me just measure up from the ground line to the height of the leg, rather than to figure out the angle itself. Once I had the leg in place, I traced the angles I needed to cut. We're using pocket holes for this just as a demonstration, but you could use half lap joints or just glue if you wanted to. After some test cuts, I settled on the final angle that you see here and cut down the leg and the excess off of the seat piece. With all the angles and cuts figured out for the first spine, I just needed to make 2 more copies. Using a table saw to remove the material for that first cross lap is definitely much faster than a circular saw, and more precise. This piece of cedar must have been really wet because it shot up a whole bunch of debris right when it hit the saw. This is a really good reminder to wear eye protection. Also, I would guess if you had a saw stop saw, you might set it off with this and cost yourself some money. Again, I would highly recommend you make a jig if you're going to do this cut. Probably not that safe the way I'm doing it. As you can see here, the center leg and back pieces are a little shorter than the side spines to allow for a top and bottom stretcher that are going to connect everything together. Once I knew everything fit together the same way, I cut the back and foot pieces to final length. I marked where I wanted to drill the pocket holes, ensuring that they all face toward the inside of the project so you won't see them. If you were interested, you could definitely just use pocket holes for this whole project. I just kind of wanted to mix it up and try some different joinery. I'm going to be using this fast curing epoxy from Total Boat, which cures in about 2 hours. It comes in these handy caulk tubes and has a gel-like consistency so that it fills any gaps really well. I found it to be a bit more durable for outdoor projects compared to wood glue. I'll link it in the description if you want to try it out. So after attaching the foot piece with epoxy and pocket holes, I glued up the cross lap and filled in some cracks where I cut the lap a bit too big with epoxy. I decided to use a few brad nails to keep things in place, but that really wasn't necessary as I ended up really just clamping things for good measure anyway. After the epoxy cured, I got my first chance to really feel how the dimensions were in real life. One of the harder things to do when you're designing a project is get the dimensions right for a human being. I realized that while I might fit a smaller person fine, I needed some extra length on the legs. So I cut some 8-inch extensions and attached them again with half laps. Again, build yourself a jig for this cut and save yourself some trouble and potential damage to your fingers. Once that cured, I used my track saw to trim down the feet under the seat so that they would sit flush with the ground. You could definitely do this with a straight edge and a circular saw if you don't have a track saw. I gave everything a light sand and then decided to clean up the back of the cross lap where the seat board was a bit proud of the back piece. This saved me a bunch of sanding because I think there's about a 1/4 inch there. Now that the spines are done, I cut the horizontal supports that are going to connect them together on the top and the foot of the lounger. I epoxied them and used pocket holes to attach them. You could definitely do just epoxy and clamp the boards, but I used pocket holes since they're not going to show anyway, and it let me keep on building while the epoxy cured. I drilled pilot holes, epoxied, and then screwed the center supports to the ends of those cross supports. This just seemed easier than pocket holes, and again, screws are only holding things in place while the epoxy cures, so the strength isn't a big issue. I think I could have stopped here and the frame would have been plenty strong thanks to the slats that we're going to put on later, but I cut a couple more horizontal supports and then epoxied and clamped them, one going under the seat and one on the back. I regret the back piece the most as it interrupts the visual flow of the back supports, but you know, it is what it is. If you do want to add these, I'd suggest you put them both on the bottom where you're not going to see them. Okay, onto the slats. I used 5 pickets in total, cutting them down to length first and then ripping them all into 1-inch widths. I also ripped down a couple 1/4 inch spacers at the end, which we're going to need to separate each of the slats as we epoxy and nail them in. A lot of the strength of this piece comes from all of those slats being epoxied on and thus holding each of the spines together across the whole front of the lounger. While not necessary, I arranged the color of the slats so that they flowed nicely, although I think that they're just going to gray out regardless, but you know, it looked really nice for the first week or so. I proceeded to epoxy and nail in the slats in batches using spacer to keep things the right distance apart. Again, the nails here are just to hold the slats in place while the epoxy cures, but I was not about to clamp 100 slats down while they cured. For the last slat on the bottom of the foot, I ripped it at an angle so that it would be flush with the ground and evenly distribute the weight of the lounger onto the ground. With the body of the lounger done, I cut down some arms. These are optional, but I think they add some nice visual interest to the piece. They're also really helpful for getting in and out of the lounger, and are a nice place to rest your arms or a drink. I attached them with pocket holes on the bottom and a bunch of epoxy to keep them nice and strong. After about a month of use, they're still holding up really well. Finally, I applied some teak oil for finish, and I was done. I'm pretty surprised with how easy this project was to build and how well it turned out. This is one of my favorite things I've made, and so far it's really comfortable to sit on with or without a cushion. I have a bunch of other builds coming based off of this visual language and build approach, so check out my Instagram if you want to see some behind the scenes footage and photos. Also subscribe to get notifications for when those videos go live. I would definitely love to hear your thoughts on this project or what you might want me to make next. So hit me up in the comments, and while you're there, why not give this video a thumbs up and help out the channel? You've made it this far after all. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Haha, here I am again at the end where the credits should go. If you liked this video, here are a couple others that you might also like, and let me know if you enjoyed those. Alright, seriously now, goodbye, and I'll see you in the next episode.